When you look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you will notice that like food and shelter, clothing is a basic human requirement for survival. First, animal hides provided protection against the elements, but we soon found out the advantages of woven fibers, and that is how the making of textiles emerged as one of humankind's fundamental technologies. From wearing animal skins and linen to the luxurious silks worn, the fashion trends have always had a significant impact on the textile industry. Now, with 52 micro-seasons a year, trends are constantly changing. So what does this mean for the textile industry? How is the textile industry keeping up with the demand? Hi designers, are you ready for our lesson quote? Infinite growth of material consumption in a finite world is an impossibility. Let's look at our lesson objectives. Today's objectives are to explore the history of textiles, distinguish between fast fashion and slow fashion, identify the environmental impact of the textile industry, define environmental sustainability, and explore the future of textiles. Welcome to lesson 2, titled The Future of Textiles. This is an incredibly important and also super interesting lesson, so I hope that you are ready to learn a lot. The evolution of textiles is incredibly interesting. In order for us as fashion designers and consumers to predict where and what the textile industry will be like in the next few years, we need to be aware of how it started and how it grew into one of the biggest industries today. By now you all should already know what a textile is, but a reminder is always good, don't you agree? Textile refers to a flexible piece of material comprising of natural or synthetic fibers known as yarn. These are formed by massing, weaving, or knitting the fibers together. The history of textiles is rich and almost as old as human civilization. Although anthropologists can't exactly pin down when or why we as humans started wearing clothes, they suspect that animal skins and vegetation were primarily used for protection. Maslow described clothing as one of the most important physiological needs for the survival of humankind. Like I have said, the history and the evolution of textiles is rich, but for today I am going to try and keep it short and sweet, only briefly touching on the most important days that can only be described as catalysts for change and growth in the textile industry. Clothing and the textiles used reflect the materials and also the technologies available at different times. Years ago, and I am talking many years ago, early humans covered their bodies with leaves, grass, bones, and animal skins to protect themselves from the elements. How did they make these clothes? They made it from fibers that they obtained from animals like sheep or from plants. Flax is the oldest fiber in human history, and through spinning and weaving, the flax fibers were transformed into linen fabric. Flax quickly became the most common plant fiber, and it also served as an important source of oil. Later on, humans started growing and cultivating cotton. Back then, again many years ago, stitching and sewing were not yet invented, so instead humans draped big pieces of textiles around their bodies. After the invention of needles made from animal bones and tusks, people started stitching pieces of fabric together, really making clothing. Because this was new and rare, tailored clothes with stitching details and embroidery signified high class. Because more and more pieces of fabric were used as a form of covering the body in the place of animal skins, textiles and the production and trade of textiles became a main factor in economic history. The invention of machinery like the spinning machine and weaving machine made it really easy to mass produce textiles. Let's take a quick look at some of those amazing machines. The spinning wheel was invented in the 14th century. The power loom was invented in the 18th century. And the sewing machine was invented in the 19th century. All of these machines played a massive and significant role in the evolution of the textile industry. The invention of synthetic dyes also made a big impact on the textile industry and drastically changed the way it was manufactured. In the past few centuries, humans started creating synthetic fibers from chemicals, and it all started with the invention of rayon. Rayon was developed in 1884, and this was originally known as artificial silk. And this brings me to the Industrial Revolution, which launched a whole new global textile industry. The steam engine quickly led to the establishments of big textile mills that were able to start mass-producing textiles. Since then, the development for newer, better, faster technologies were continuous. The 20th century also saw innovative developments in the creation of textiles, such as the exploration of synthetic dyes and textiles. Rayon, nylon, which was developed in 1935, polyester and spandex totally revolutionized the textile industry. Around the 1960s, the Textile Fiber Product Identification Act became law. What does this mean? You will find out in the next slide. Moving on to the 1980s or the early 1980s, robotics were introduced in the factories, producing more at an incredible pace. It is also around this time that mass production of clothing became very popular. Hello, fast fashion. Coming back to the Textile Fiber Product Identification Act, that is a mouthful. Did you know that you are actually wearing a piece of history? Quickly look for a little tag on the inside of your clothing. It is usually sewn into the side seam. Generally, you can see some washing instructions, but have you ever noticed that it also lists the fabric or fabrics used to make up the garment? This must be there. It is federal law, and it is defined as the TFPIA, or the Textile Fiber Product Identification Act. This act says that the manufacturers or producers of textiles and clothing must identify all of the fibers used to make the textile product. This is often referred to as the composition of the fabric. Furthermore, the fabrics must also be listed in order, so the fiber composing of the highest percentage of the product must appear first, like in the image you can see on screen. What is the composition of the fabric you are wearing right now? Please pop your answer into the Morpheus chat box. About 60% of all the clothing today contains polyester or some kind of synthetic fiber. This cheap fiber is the main driving force of the fast fashion industry, and honestly, you can understand why. Synthetic textiles have a lot of advantages. A great advantage is that they are more durable than most natural fibers, which explains why it is often combined with natural fibers to strengthen the textile. It also offers consumer-friendly functions such as stretching, waterproofing, and it is often stain and wrinkle resistant. For manufacturers, the great advantage is that it is a whole lot cheaper than natural fibers, and it does not require as much time to manufacture. I know there were a lot of information packed into those slides, so let's quickly do a recap. Textiles were first produced by humans for their own needs, but once it exceeded their own needs, textiles were traded for other goods. The Industrial Revolution really revolutionized the industry with the introduction of new technologies. With all the new technologies, people started experimenting more with synthetic fibers, and we saw the creation of incredible textiles like rayon, polyester, and nylon. Today, synthetic textiles are still being invented, especially with the rise of fast fashion. What is fast fashion, you ask? Some parts of modern life are known to cause environmental harm, like driving to and from work, buying and using disposable plastic items like bags and straws, and flying overseas. But when it comes to clothes, the environmental impacts are less visible. This makes it very dangerous. We, as consumers, buy a lot more clothes, and it is this need to buy and tap into the latest fashion trends that is taking a toll on the environment. This manufacturing of clothing at warp speed and sold at very low price points are referred to as fast fashion. Fast fashion can be defined as cheap, trendy, and disposable clothing produced to meet the consumer demand. The goal is to get the newest and trendiest style on the market as fast as possible so that the consumer feel encouraged to buy them while they are at the height of popularity, and then discard them after a while, either because of the bad quality or because it is already considered to be out of fashion. Unfortunately, consumers are encouraged to constantly change their wardrobe to keep up with the ever-changing trends. And unfortunately, without cheap synthetic fibers like polyester, nylon, and spandex, the current fast fashion phenomenon would not have been possible. The next time you go shopping, look for the label and check the composition of the fabric. You will notice that it is very difficult to find a shirt or a pair of jeans that is made out of 100% pure cotton. And if you do find one, it will probably be quite a bit more expensive than the synthetic alternative. That's the thing though. People chase trends, unaware of the price of their actions. I mentioned the price of our actions, the price of fashion, because this rise of fast fashion and the use of synthetic fibers have a very dark side. It is almost like we have a monster living in our wardrobes. Every stage of a piece of clothing's life threatens our planet and its resources. And no, I am not being overdramatic. The textile industry is considered to be the second most polluting industry. Researchers found that fashion accounts for up to 10% of global pollution, generating about 92 million tons of textile waste each year and consuming about 1.5 trillion liters of water annually, and contributes about 190,000 tons of microplastic pollution. They found, not to their surprise, that fast fashion, which, just to remind you, is the act of buying more and wearing less, has contributed to these numbers significantly. These are some scary statistics, people. The textile industry is known for consuming large amounts of natural resources, water, and energy. The environmental issues start with the very first step in the textile manufacturing process, the creation of fibers. Chemicals and pesticides are used in the cultivation of natural fibers, and a lot of harmful emissions created during the production of synthetic fibers. From this moment, there are a series of processes that require a lot of chemicals, a huge amount of water, and a significant amount of energy to treat the fibers and turn them into a textile. This has huge consequences for the environment and global warming. Global warming, for those who don't know, occur when carbon dioxide and any other air pollutants collect in the atmosphere and absorb the sunlight and solar radiation that have bounced off the Earth's surface. This means that the radiation can't escape into space, but instead sits in the Earth's atmosphere for years or even centuries, trapping the heat, and that causes the planet to get hotter. The consequences of global warming include severe weather conditions, more diseases and deaths, high wildlife extinction rates, and higher sea levels threatening the coastal cities, and these are just a few consequences. The fashion and the textile industry are key contributors to global warming, the second most polluting industry, accounting for about 10% of global carbon emissions. The total emissions from the textile industry is more than those of international flights and shipping combined. Sadly, it is predicted that the sector's emissions will rise to 60% by 2030, being one of the largest contributors. You can see why it is necessary for the textile industry to change. Before we really get into how the textile industry can change by looking at some amazing examples of what people are already experimenting with, we first need to look at the root of the problem. So we are quickly going to take a look at the three main areas of textile production and how it is having a negative impact on the environment. These three areas are water, waste, and energy. The textile industry is a major consumer of water. Huge quantities of fresh water is used for the growing and cultivating of plants, cotton being a big culprit in this case. Fresh water is also used during the dyeing and finishing processes of all textiles. Up to 20,000 liters of water is needed to produce just 1 kilogram of cotton. People, that is over 300 showers for 1 kilogram of cotton. This, as you can imagine, generates tremendous pressure on this precious resource that is already scarce. To show you the dramatic consequences, such as desertification, this is an image of the Aral Sea. Can you see the sea? Neither can I. That is because cotton production has entirely drained all the water. How scary is that? The production of textiles require an insane amount of water. But it is not only the amount of the resource used during the process that is negatively affecting the environment. It is also the discarding of the water after it has been used. The discharge is full of harmful chemicals. The large volume of water used during the production, dye and wet processes deliver a variety of chemicals and colorants defined as effluents to freshwater sources due to irresponsible and unsustainable waste disposal practices. Industrial wastewater may contain harmful toxins that could possibly be very dangerous to humans and also pose a serious threat to aquatic life. Did you know that textiles and clothing can also shed microfibers? Microfibers are super tiny strands of plastic that shed off synthetic fibers every time you wash your clothes in a washing machine. Some microfibers are removed during the treatment process of wastewater, but about 40% gets drained out into rivers and eventually the sea. Synthetic microfibers are responsible for a third of all the microplastic pollution in our waters. Can you kind of see where I am going with this? Beautiful fish in the ocean consume the plastic fibers, and guess what? We eat fish, don't we? So ultimately, the microfibers end up in us. A study estimated that Europeans eat up to 11,000 pieces of plastic a year. Don't you think that is super scary? Let's move on to energy. Over 60% of textiles produced are used in the fashion industry, and a large proportion of these clothing manufacturers occur in India and China, both countries that use coal-fueled power plants. This dramatically increases the carbon footprint of each garment. The phrase carbon footprint gets thrown around quite a lot, but do you actually know what it means? The dictionary definition is the amount of carbon dioxide released into the atmosphere as a result of the activities of a particular individual, organization, or community. We as human beings have prioritized the usage of non-renewable sources and have thus made the atmosphere very polluted and toxic. Our planet is super duper cool and unique because life is possible on Earth. It is only possible because of the balance ratio between oxygen and carbon dioxide in the air. Now, it is important to have carbon dioxide, but we have caused toxicity by increasing the amount of carbon dioxide, making it very dangerous. As we have learned, we want to reduce global warming and not add more carbon dioxide to the atmosphere. With fashion changing at the speed of light, what becomes of the clothes that don't sell or is not considered fashionable anymore? How can the fashion industry, particularly the textile industry, become more sustainable? Luckily, the fashion and textile industry hold potential for transformation. How can we tap into this potential though, while reducing the environmental impact? The textile industry is one of the oldest industries known to mankind, but the dark side of the industry has been brought to the limelight, and we are becoming more and more aware of the consequences after being ranked as the second largest polluting industry in the world. It is a fact that consumer awareness is and will play an important role in the growth of sustainable clothing in the future. Consumers want transparency and they want to know where their clothes are coming from. We can see a trend in consumers moving away from fast fashion and towards slow fashion, forcing designers and the fashion and textile industry to do the same. Slow fashion, which is the opposite of fast fashion, is an approach which considers the processes and resources required to make clothing, really focusing on all three pillars of sustainability. It involves buying better quality clothing, the fair treatment of workers in the industry, and the respect for animals and our planet. Before we look at the future of textiles and how to be a more sustainable designer, let me tell you a little bit about our next lesson because it really is a super exciting one. Let me ask you a question. Are you a more is more type of designer? Are you curious about the possibilities of designing contemporary textiles and surfaces? If yes, the next lesson is totally for you. In Getting Crafty, we will explore different types of textile surface design techniques to get your creative juices flowing. This includes beading, embroidery, and dyeing techniques that will take your design to the next level. All of the elements of fast fashion add up to having an incredibly harmful impact on the environment and also the people involved in its production. But how do we change the current fashion or textile industry? How do we minimize its environmental impact and make it a more sustainable industry? We hear the word sustainable being thrown around quite a bit, and you'll also hear me talk about sustainability, but what does it really mean? There is really no universally agreed definition. In fact, there are many different viewpoints. But where does the word sustainability come from, and what does it mean? When you really break the word up, sustainability, or the word sustainable, describes something that is able to be sustained or kept at a certain level. Now, just so that you know, there are three pillars of sustainability, and these are environmental sustainability, economic sustainability, and social sustainability. But for today, we are going to focus on environmental sustainability, which can be defined as the actions through which we as humans avoid the depletion of natural resources to keep an ecological balance so that our quality of life and the life of the animals and plants on Earth does not decrease. Do you get that? Sustainability means meeting our own needs responsibly without compromising and or jeopardizing the ability for future generations to meet their own needs. There are amazing people at the forefront of change, coming up with incredible sustainable ideas, including ways to reduce waste, reuse and recycle, new technology, and modifying the products to be more environmentally friendly while still fulfilling its purpose. Let's look at a few examples for each one. Reduction of waste, reuse and recycle, new process technology, product modification. Let's take a look at what people are doing to decrease the environmental impact of the textile industry. First up, organic cotton. Cotton is one of the most popular natural textiles, but even though it is natural, does not mean that it is sustainable. Unfortunately, it is a very thirsty plant that requires a lot of pesticides and chemicals to grow. Organic cotton is grown without the use of pesticides or any other kind of chemical fertilizer. It is grown using materials and processes that have a low environmental impact. Its high absorbency also makes it easier to dye, requiring less water and energy. But is there a way to make cotton even more sustainable? Yes! Scientists have genetically modified cotton to feature colors, as you can see in the image, to help the textile industry curb its addiction to toxic dye. This means that new plants would not need to go through a dyeing process, which eliminates the energy used, water used, and wastewater and dye released into the environment, making it the more sustainable alternative. Don't you think that's so super cool? Next up is from plastic to fabric. There was a time not so long ago when plastic bottles were a huge threat to the environment, but today it is being recycled into textiles. This process has proven that recycling reduces air, water, and land pollution, which helps to create a more sustainable industry and environment. With amazing technology, these plastic bottles are now transformed into a soft, breathable, and affordable fabric. To make the fabric, bottles have to first be cleaned, melted, and stretched into fine fibers. They are then woven into soft fabrics and can be made into different weights and textures, making it a very versatile alternative. Next up is waterless dyeing. As you know, the textile industry uses a lot of water during the dyeing and finishing of textiles and is responsible for polluting the environment with wastewater filled with nasty chemicals. Until a few years back, there has been no alternative for dyeing fabrics with water until now. Dry dyeing is a waterless dyeing technique that uses a supercritical liquefied form of carbon dioxide to dye materials without any water, while still providing the same result as the conventional water-based method. Not only does it not use any water, but it is also a naturally occurring inexhaustible resource and is relatively inexpensive. Couture is a design consultancy focused on bringing biological and living materials into fashion. The owner, Suzanne Lee, started experimenting with creating her own textile by using bacteria and growing it inside a vat of liquid. Their basic recipe is just green tea, sugar, some acetic acid, like vinegar, and starter culture, which is yeast and bacteria. After a while, something started growing on the surface of the liquid, and that is a new, almost leathery type of textile that they were able to sew and create garments with, like the one you see on your screen. Because of its high absorbency, she is also able to dye the piece of textile any color she wants. It is still, however, in the developmental phase, as it is not yet water resistant, meaning if you walk in the rain wearing a shirt made of this textile, you will get wet, it will get really heavy and probably tear and slip off of you. Suzanne is not developing this to replace other textiles, but definitely sees the value in it as a sustainable addition to the Earth's precious natural resources. Talk about growing consumable products. Next up is vegan leather. Dr. Carmen, once a leather expert, discovered the environmental impact of the leather industry and set out to find a better solution. After a lot of blood, sweat, and research, she invented a natural vegan leather made from pineapple leaves. These leaves are a byproduct of existing pineapples, which means its environmental impact is very low. The fibers of this vegan leather is natural and biodegradable, however the coating is petroleum-based, making the final product not biodegradable. She is, however, working on a bio-based coating. I am super curious. Please let me know if you knew of any of these new textile inventions or if you learned something new today. There are amazing people working very hard trying to make the textile industry more sustainable, as you can see from the incredible, innovative examples. But you might be asking yourself, what can I do to make a difference? Can I even make a difference? Will this restrict me as a designer? Do I even want to make a difference? Is it worth it? The answer is yes. Yes, you can make a difference. Yes, it does come with restrictions, I'm not going to lie. But as we have learned, restrictions or creative constraints can really push you as a designer to be more creative. And yes, it is worth it. Every little bit helps. Let me tell you how you can contribute as a fashion designer. Let's look at some top tips of how you can be a more sustainable designer. Tip 1. Be a conscious designer. Really think about what you are trying to put out there and how your art will impact the environment. Ask yourself whether you can design and create in a more sustainable way. 2. Go slow. Instead of hopping from one trend to another, design responsibly. Think of long-term items. I'm not saying you need to be boring and design classic things that you can already find in stores. No, we want you to be creative and still stand out. But think about how you can make your designs stay in fashion for a bit longer. Perhaps don't design according to trends, but really find your niche in the market and stick to your brand identity or story when designing. Tip number 3. Select sustainable materials like bamboo, organic cotton, linen, and hemp. These all have a lower impact on the environment than synthetic textiles. Try to minimize waste during the pattern making and garment construction phase. Think about how you can cut and construct a garment to reduce cut-offs, or how to recycle or reuse the cut-offs. Maybe you can use it to create patchwork, or maybe you can use it to stuff pillows. Be creative. Tip number 5. Remember the label with the textile composition on it. It is important to think about the composition of your fabric and let your consumers know. Be as transparent with your consumer as possible. And tip number 6, reduce waste in packaging. This is something we all can be more conscious of. If something is disposable and does not serve an important purpose, make it biodegradable. Change is essential, and as a designer, we must lead the change and adapt to create an industry that is more sustainable. It is not a, let me think about this kind of situation. It is your responsibility as a future designer to create fashion with purpose. Designers, this challenge will be a little bit different, but just as fun. I would like you to do a little bit of research of either a new kind of sustainable textile or type of manufacturing process. Or you can post any way we as consumers or designers can be more sustainable when it comes to buying or designing clothes. Please share your research on your favorite social media platform and with your classmates on the Show Academy Facebook group. Please remember to tag Show Academy and use the hashtag Show Fashion Textiles. This will help me find your challenge and maybe you can teach me something new too. I want you to be inspired. You are all the designers of the future, so start thinking about how you will design using these new textiles. I really hope you all have fun researching. It is time for your first lesson assignment for Module 3, guys. Please don't forget to complete your lesson assignment. It is a great way to test whether or not you understand the content. Congratulations, designers, you are done with Lesson 2 of Module 3. Are you enjoying it so far? Please let me know. Also, a huge thank you for being so patient. As you know, this is a brand new course and we are working hard to give you amazing and interactive lessons. Thank you so much for joining me, and I'm looking forward to having all of you back for Lesson 3, Getting Crafty. Before you run away, let's revisit our lesson quote. Infinite growth of material consumption in a finite world is an impossibility. Does this quote evoke more emotions after you have learned more about the textile industry's environmental impact? If we keep living, consuming, and designing the way we are, what will happen once we have exhausted all of the Earth's resources? What will that mean for the fashion industry? What will that mean for nature? What will that mean for us as living beings? What will our future look like? That is all from me for today. As always, stay fashionable, designers.